We're starting closed session, 3:01. Okay, so we need for you to read into closed session, and then we need to vote. Ms. Williams,
That needs to stay open for right now.
until we read into it.
I move that the school board recess into closed session in accordance with the exceptions to open meetings law set forth in Code of Virginia 2.2-3, 711, Part A, paragraphs 3, 7, and 8, as amended, to deliberate on the following matters. 3, discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. 7, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body. For the purpose of this subdivision, probable litigation means litigation that has been specifically threatened or in which the public body or its legal counsel has a reasonable basis to believe will be commenced by or against a known party. Nothing in this subdivision shall be construed to permit the closure of a meeting merely because an attorney representing the public body is in attendance or is consulted on a matter. 8, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. Nothing in this subdivision shall be construed to permit the closure of a meeting merely because an attorney representing the public body is in attendance or is consulted on a matter, namely to discuss A, discussion with staff regarding status of certain matters related to real property related to educational services. B, status of pending litigation or administrative cases. C, consultation with legal counsel regarding probable litigation and pending litigation matters.
Second.
Okay, so we have first
That is a motion.
a motion and a seconded. All in favor? If you want to close, please raise your hand.
Madam Chair, we have 9 ayes. The motion did pass to go into closed.
So we are now in closed session. Ms. Linetti.
closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the school board of the city of Virginia Beach hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered.
Do I have a second? Second, okay. We have, a motion by Mrs. Melnick, second by Mrs. Brown. All in favor to come out of close, please raise your hand.
Madam Chair, we have 11 ayes. The motion did pass for certification of closed.
Okay, so, now we will start our workshop. It is 3:46. And good afternoon, I'm Trinace Riggs, School Board Chair, and the Administrative Informant and Workshop Session of this meeting of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach, Virginia, is hereby convened at 3:47 p.m. on this 9th day of January 9th, 2024. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on schoolboard.vbschools.com/meeting/live, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47 and on Zoom. And thank you to all of those that are here today and have joined us online. Okay, so let me make this announcement. Due to the current weather conditions, the decision has been made to shorten tonight's meeting. Accordingly, the formal meeting agenda will be modified to remove public comments and information items. The school board agenda will continue with the scheduled afternoon workshops, the annual meeting elections, appointments, and adoption of meeting schedule. Consent and action items. All other matters will be moved to a future agenda. This decision has been made for safety purposes, and we apologize for any inconvenience. Please be safe tonight. Also, as a brief update on the superintendent search process, the school board has been conducting interviews of candidates since January 5th and will continue with interviews through this week and possibly the following week. Updates on the progress of the superintendent search will be provided at the next regularly scheduled school board meeting. And at this time, we will now proceed with the rest of our meeting. So for our budget process overview, welcome Ms. Crystal Pate, our Chief Financial Officer.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chairwoman Weems, School Board members, Dr. Robertson. This presentation is to give you a high-level overview of the budget process here in Virginia Beach and at the state level. Towards the end, I will provide an update on the governor's proposed biennium budget released on December 20th. The agenda for this presentation is shown on this slide. We will review VBCPS's budget calendar, school funding revenue sources, VBCPS's internal budget work, the state's budget calendar and budget process, and the process for handling school board member questions. The slide shows you VBCPS budget calendar that was approved by the school board earlier in the fiscal year. Highlighted is where we are currently at in the timeline. The budget staff, along with the superintendent, are reviewing, refining, and summarizing outside the base budget request. Toward the end of January, the proposed school operating budget and capital improvement program budget will be presented to the superintendent for review. On February 6th, we will present the school operating budget and the capital improvement program budget to the school board. Keep in mind, state revenue presented on February 6th in the Superintendent's Estimate of Needs, or SEON, will be based on the governor's proposed budget. Crossover in the General Assembly will occur February 4th, but we will not have any additional information at the state level until later in February or in March. Also, there is uncertainty surrounding whether City Council will approve a reduction in the real estate tax rate, which will decrease the amount of local revenue we receive. The lack of final information from both the city and state can change the budget we are presenting in the SEON. The final state budget hopefully will be available the first part of March, and it is possible that the decision on the potential reduction in the real estate tax rate will come later in the budget development process, and we will have more information as we get closer to the budget being approved by City Council. This next slide shows you the school division's revenue sources and how our final amended fiscal year 2023-24 compares to what we are estimating at this point for fiscal year 2024-25. You can see that we are showing an overall increase in revenue of approximately $20.4 million, with the majority of the increase coming from the city. Oh, they must have uploaded the wrong slide. My apologies. I know, I did too, until I had to. I apologize. Okay, okay, yeah, it's 20. So you're gonna see this changes, in the state part is what's happening. I apologize for that. As long as you have that in your document, that's good. As also note that we are only seeing a small increase in state revenue now of only $4.5 million instead of the 10.7 that you see on this slide. And then we are seeing a decrease that offsets that state revenue and state sales tax of $3.9 million. And so the net out to overall increase from the state revenues for the amended 23-24 budget to the 2024-25 is only $545,000. The table at the bottom of the slide provides you with the approximate reductions in local revenue as it relates to a reduction in the real estate tax rate. The range is from a reduction of 1 cent to a reduction of 7 cents, with corresponding reductions in funding of $3.7 million up to $25.9 million. Keep in mind that the city's real estate assessor releases an annual report in mid to late February, which will contain updated assessments for fiscal year 2025. The reduction estimates the city has provided us to date are on the most recent estimate of assessments and is subject to change after the February release.
Ms. Melnick.
Before you go on, you gave a number of 545,000, and I think collectively we all said where, so.
So that should be on, see, we have the wrong slide unfortunately on
Okay.
there.
So
what
this
it
one
is-
might not be right either.
So it's 20 million. So if you look on the state revenue all the way across, you
Yep.
see an increase of about $4.5 million just
Yep.
in state. In the state sales tax, you'll see a decrease of about $3.9 million.
Yes.
Those two numbers net out to an overall net increase of $545,000. Yes.
I only had to know to 18 in first grade, so thank you.
You're welcome. So now we will move into the budget work that is being performed by VPCPS during the budget development process. Over the past 2 months, senior leadership under the direction of Dr. Robertson has been doing a detailed line item review of their current budgets. Allow me to share some of the key actions we have taken to date. Each chief officer has conducted a thorough review of their personnel budgeted positions to include those funded in the operating budget with ESSER funds and STEAs, which are temporary employment agreements. As you know, positions covered through ESSER funds will be either eliminated or moved into the operating budget in fiscal year 2025 as new positions. TEAs are valuable staff that often are needed due to the inability to hire a funded FTE in the operating budget, and their compensation does not include fringe benefits, only FICA. The personnel budget is developed from data extracted from our position management system at a point in time. For the fiscal year 2025 budget development, the personnel data was pulled in on November 15th. The data in this file includes not only all FTE positions, but also includes our FTE vacancies at that point in time. This also includes allowances and benefits, including the employer's share of FICA, VRS, life insurance, and the retiree health insurance credit. As we move closer to February 6th, we are looking for direction from the board on staff raises. Human Resources has been meeting with our outside consultant, Siegel, to work up the cost of some scenarios that should be presented in their compensation presentation to the board later this month. Once the data is extracted, budget staff in our office must reconcile the current personnel data to the prior year's adopted budget. So once the budget was adopted for fiscal year 2023-24, throughout the year, there are several personnel changes communicated out based on assessed needs, reclassifications, and reallocations. Budget staff adjust the prior year adopted budget for all the changes that have occurred throughout the year, so we have a better picture of where we are, and once reconciled, that is the starting point for the development of the CION. The allocations of instructional personnel in Virginia Beach are based on guidelines that meet or exceed the standards of quality, the accreditation requirements of Virginia, and core class size caps as adopted by the school board. The number of classroom teachers and many other positions provided at each school is based on specific staffing formulas for each program level. For example, the number of classroom teachers assigned to an elementary school is determined by the number of students based on our pupil-teacher ratio. At the secondary level, class size is influenced by the number of students and class schedules. We include the complete VBCPS staffing standards and guidelines in the appendix of the superintendent's estimate of needs. In the area of non-FTE personnel and other expenditures, chief officers and their department heads have been directed to thoroughly review all expenditures to identify those that are critical needs, lead to greater productivity and efficiency, or those that are nice to have. As we move deeper into the development of the CION and scenarios, the board will see evidence of resources that could be slated for removal based on available funding. Our goal is to ensure we are keeping the resources that deliver the best return on investment. For newly identified budget items based on student or staff needs, new legislation, or priorities, chief officers and department heads must complete a budget request form. The forms are routed through the budget office to Dr. Robertson, who has final approval of whether to include the new item. This is a sample of the new budget request form. I know it's difficult to read, but the thing to note here is that we're asking that each request outside of the base budget be tied to the strategic plan, and then also to provide some additional information to support the financial justification of the request. Moving forward, the budget team will work with all chief officers on a weekly basis to make adjustments to their budgets based on new information or board inquiries. We will be creating savings buckets, which are simply a list of resources that could be considered if we have a reduction in expected revenues. These buckets will be shared with the board in future workshop presentations. This next section will address the state budget calendar and process. The budget process in Virginia typically involves several stages as shown on this slide. As many of you know, Virginia follows a biennial budget process, meaning the state's budget covers a 2-year period that subsequently is amended annually. The process begins each December. The governor introduces a budget proposal to the Virginia General Assembly. This usually occurs in odd number years, and the budget covers the upcoming 2 fiscal years. The proposal outlines the governor's priorities, funding recommendations, and policy initiatives. Thereafter, annually, there are mid-biennium amendments to the current 2-year budget. Typically, these amendments are to address changes in economic conditions, revenue projections, or emerging priorities. This can involve legislative action or executive orders, depending on the circumstances. Once the governor submits the budget, the General Assembly's finance committees, along with other relevant committees, review the proposal in detail. They analyze the proposed allocations, consider the economic outlook, and gather input from various agencies and stakeholders. The committees hold hearings to gather input from state agencies, local governments, advocacy groups, and the public. This allows for a comprehensive review of budgetary needs and priorities. Based on the feedback received during the review process, the House and Senate each propose amendments to the governor's proposed budget. This involves adjustments to funding levels, reallocation of resources, and changes to specific provisions within the budget proposal. The House and Senate must approve a budget. Discrepancies between the 2 versions passed by each chamber are then reconciled through a conference committee where the House and Senate appoint conferees who negotiate a deal and present a conference report that the House and Senate then approve. Once the General Assembly approves a final budget, it is sent to the governor for approval. The governor has the authority to sign the budget into law, veto specific line items, or propose amendments which the legislator then votes up or down. This slide just summarizes the key dates during the state budget process. These dates are tentative and subject to change. In 2024, the General Assembly convenes tomorrow on January 10th. The crossover, where the budget proposals from the House and Senate cross over to the other side of the legislature, is scheduled for February 4th. The General Assembly is to adjourn March 9th. If there is agreement during the regular session and everything runs on time, the hope is that a state budget is delivered when the General Assembly adjourns sine in March, meaning there is no appointed date for resumption. If there is not an agreement and the governor proposes amendments, then the General Assembly is reconvened in session if needed, and this is scheduled for April 10th. The primary component of Virginia's K-12 education budget is the Standards of Quality funding formula. The Constitution of Virginia requires the Virginia Board of Education to prescribe standards of quality for the public schools of Virginia, subject to revision only by the General Assembly. These standards are known as the Standards of Quality, or SOQ, and set out the minimum requirements for providing a quality public education that must be met by all Virginia public schools and school divisions. The SOQ covers various aspects of education, including staffing levels, class sizes, and instructional resources. Most state funding is dispersed through programs and funding streams that are part of the SOQ. Additional state funding comes from programs funded by the lottery or other funding streams, including incentive and categorical programs. Some incentive and lottery programs require local matches, which impact the operating budget. For the 2024-2026 biennium, the state will go through the rebenchmarking process. Rebenchmarking updates the projected cost for public education for the upcoming biennium, using fiscal year 2022 salaries and support costs as reported by school divisions as the base. The salaries are then adjusted to account for 5% and 7% increases provided in fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024 respectively. Support costs are adjusted to account for inflation occurring during fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024. While the SOQ accounts for over 90% of state K-12 funding, all programs are updated during rebenchmarking. Enrollment projections and prevailing salaries and other costs are updating during biennial rebenchmarking. Biennial rebenchmarking also updates the local composite index, which determines state and local shares of funding for K-12. Localities with a lower LCI receive more state funding than those with a higher index. The fiscal year 2024-2026 LCI for Virginia Beach City Public Schools is 0.4138, which means that the City of Virginia Beach is required to pay about 41.4% of the cost of the minimum education program set by the state SOQ. As you can see by this graph, our composite index has been fairly stable over the last 5 to 7 years, and we did see a small increase from 2024 to 2025. This slide shows you the major data elements that are updated for the biennium and those that are updated annually. So you're going to, so as you see going into the biennium, there are a few more data points considered versus when we are in an off year. A major driver in the budget process is student enrollment. And looking at the projected student enrollment, it is projected that we will be a little over 62,000 students for fiscal year 2024-25 fiscal year. While enrollment has declined over the last 5 years and it is beginning to flatten, keep in mind that student needs are expected to have an increasing impact on the budget. We have seen and continue to see increases in economically disadvantaged students, English learners, students with disabilities, students who experience learning loss from the pandemic, as well as an increase in social emotional needs. I'll now transition to briefly cover what we know at this point about the governor's proposed biennial budget. Over the next biennium, the governor is proposing $764 million for Virginia's K-12 schools, including $160 million for rebenchmarking, $122 million to cover another 2% raise for teachers in fiscal year 2026, and $53 million for a 1% bonus in fiscal year 2025. The governor also proposed investing $61 million to expand the hiring of reading specialists, $40 million to support students seeking industry-recognized credentials through Diploma Plus grants directly to qualified students, $40 million to develop a new state assessment system, and $60 million for lab schools. As we noted earlier, we received the DOE's calc tool on January 4th that details out the impact of this governor's proposed budget for Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in looking at our state revenue from our fiscal year 2024 adopted budget that we're in right now, comparing that to what we're estimating for fiscal year 2025, we are only seeing state funding increase, excluding sales tax, of approximately $4.5 million. We are seeing a decrease in the sales tax estimate of approximately $3.9 million. So that variance is only netting VVCPS at $545,000 increase from this fiscal year to fiscal year 2025. We recognize during the budget development process, board members will have questions as they digest all the information provided to them in a relatively short period of time. We ask that all questions be submitted via email to the superintendent and chief financial officer. We ask that you please copy all school board members on your email, and responses to questions will be presented back to all school board members in the following scheduled board meeting. Thank you for the time, and I will conclude this presentation.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much. You want to say something, Dr. Robertson?
So, when Ms. Pate shared the projected revenues based on what we have from the state right now and federal and local, it was a little over $20 million. And just for your awareness, and because it will help us in our budget creation, a 3% raise is roughly $20 million. So if all we did was a 3% raise, any additional costs would have to be absorbed with existing budget reductions. We are not going to assume that the city council will not decide to do something with the real estate tax rate. So when we talked about this notion of buckets, I've asked my team to identify adjustments they can make to their everything that they have within their budget. Separate first into two categories. What is an absolute must-have, and what is the nice-to-have? And then let's go and address the nice-to-haves first. If you had to reduce the number of nice-to-haves, where would you start? And then if it was 1 cent cut and we had to find 3.7 million, we will deliberate on what's the best recommendation to the board to make those reductions at 3.7 million. If it's a 2 cent cut and 7.4, there'll be a point in that cut, probably 3 or 4%. We're talking about people. And when we get to 3 and 4 cents, if we're talking about people, I think our conversations are going to be really important because there is a lot of uncertainty about what will happen with the state budget. Even the governor who came and spoke yesterday to the state superintendents, he talked about the fact that no one can understand the funding formula based upon the SOQs. He said, we have got to change the way we fund public schools. He said, you know, even though we have declining enrollment, he said, I've put more money into education in the next biennium because we all recognize the inherent challenges that our kids are facing. And he talked about those things of learning loss and recovering from learning loss. He talked about mental health. He talked about the increasing number of students with disabilities and students who speak other languages as their native language. And he said it's going to be critically important that we look at not only fiscal responsibility, but we also look at legislation and things like that to try to help us make decisions. So every school division in the Commonwealth is in the same situation. But it will absolutely help us immensely if we have a baseline from this board to say, no matter what, I want you to provide us with a CON that includes X% raise. Because then we can start there knowing this is how much money we're going to have, and then we can start driving cuts. unfortunately, it won't be helpful for us to get that on January 23rd. We really need some direction tonight on, is there a number that this group can coalesce around that we can use as a starting point? Doesn't mean it has to be the final decision that you guys make. But is there a number that you say, okay, no matter what, let's at least try to do this? So that would be very helpful as we go into the next 2 weeks, which are really critical because we want to be able to provide you with more information, much more information on January 23rd.
What has the city council proposed for raises for?
So
their
my conversations
employees?
with the city manager indicated that they wanted to do at least 3%, but they'd like to get to 4%.
I think that's important for us to know too. Any other questions? Ms. Brown and then Ms. Melnick.
So you're asking for direction right now on raises, correct?
It would be nice if for us, again, for a planning portion to say, no matter what, Dr. Robertson, we really need you to bring back an X percent raise for our staff, because then we know, at least we're clear on what that number would be. Because we know, again, I said, just 3% is roughly $20 million, which just so happens to be almost every penny we're projected to possibly get extra.
Yeah, so, I mean, I love the idea of coming back with a percent, but it's hard to make a decision on that right now without knowing what types of, cuts would be required, to do that. I mean, I think 3% sounds great, but I also feel like there's kind of a lot of uncertainty on certain things, and so I personally am okay with 3%, but I would like to know that there's room to cut, and I also kind of would like to see us still evaluating some of those things anyway, just to make sure they're not,
I agree 100%.
Okay.
And so that's why I made the comment that nothing that you guys say tonight is set in stone. If you say tonight, well, look, I want you to investigate 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever, that's a number we'll use to know that we're trying to get to. But until you get the whole meal, you won't be able to determine which items you want to eat and which items you're going to leave on the table. So, but it would help us to say, okay, the board is continued in their commitment to addressing compensation for staff. And, you know, again, the city council, the city manager indicated they would like to shoot for 3 cents, 3%, but really they like to get 4%.
So he just needs something from us so they can go back, and that doesn't mean we're not gonna get all that information we need.
Correct.
But he just wants to see, like he said, continued compensation and around how much, so they can start somewhere.
I do like that idea, though, of bringing back what 2%, 3%, and 4% would look like for us. I like that, and to get to that, what we would need to do, so that's something that I would like to see. Thank you.
Ms. Melnick?
Dr. Robertson, when the governor mentioned, the funding formula for K-12 education, I'm assuming that part of that was because of the results of the JLARC study. Did he offer any information? Was it just rhetorical, or was it, I have a plan, I'm thinking about a plan? Is there some direction?
His team is looking at more of a student-based formula.
Okay.
He made several remarks during his presentation to us that the one-size-fits-all approach to funding is not a good approach.
Okay.
That we need to be able to provide a funding formula to school divisions based upon the individual needs of the students that attend that school division. There are a couple of models that are used in other states that they're looking at. It is not something they'll be able to fix this year, but
But there's a serious look now.
there's a serious look
Okay.
at changing how we fund education
Excellent.
in Virginia.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Owens?
Thank you. Like Ms. Brown, I'm happy to take a look at those percentages that were mentioned. As a board, I think it's really important that we strive for a minimum of 3%, 5 being maybe a ceiling max. But if we come in behind where the city lands, we are going to lose employees. A lot of our positions are reciprocal, that, you know, transferable, and we need to keep them. We need to be looking at, you know, inflation rates and all of those things. So I would like to make hard decisions to get us to 3% as the basement there. So, thank you.
I agree. Ms. Manning?
So in our years of abundance in '22 and '23, we gave a 6% raise. Last year, we gave an average of a 9.5% raise. So and again, we have to remember these are taxpayer dollars. In a year where we're not going to have abundance, and you're talking about cutting positions, potentially cutting programs, I can't advocate for a raise and when we're having to do that. To me, I would rather make sure that we have the programs necessary for our kids to achieve. And you know, we've made some great strides in compensating all of our employees, including our teachers, much better than we have in the past. But we also have to consider our taxpayers here as well, who are struggling. And that's where the money is coming from, and we have to remember that. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson?
So when you speak to the manager, city manager, find out if they're cutting anywhere in their budget. You know, is it just the school system where they're going to cut? I hope not. I hope we're not the first place that they look at to cut, because we are important. And I realize that we take a big chunk of the city budget, almost half. But the schools are the reason that businesses want to come here. People move here because of our schools. We are important. And I think city council realizes that. At least most of them that I have talked to realize that we are a very important part of what makes our city a great city. So, and I agree with Ms. Owens. I think a minimum 3%. But I would like to shoot for 5. And I think you need to let our city manager know. And as far as what we've done in the past, I'm not looking in the rearview mirror at what we've done. What we did in the past was because we had to do it to catch up for years that we couldn't. I don't want to go back there. I'm not going to look in the rearview mirror, and I want to look forward. And I want our school system to be the best school system in the country. We can't get there if we don't have teachers, and our teachers are going to walk. We've been told we have a lot of teachers who are at 30 years who are ready to walk. There's not a whole lot that's going to keep them here. Several of them that I know of stayed last year due to the raise that we gave. And I don't expect people to teach forever. That's not my point. If you work 30 or 35 years, 30, 32, 35, you're entitled to walk. It's your time. But we don't want to lose somebody at 26 either. We don't want to lose them, before they get to 30 at least. That's a minimum. So I think a minimum 3%. Let's aim for 5. I know that it's asking a lot, but if you ask the general taxpayer out there, are they willing to not cut the real estate tax so that we can fund our schools properly? Most people out there will tell you, I'm in favor of funding our schools, and I'm not willing to cut the budget just so that we can not fund our schools. They are in favor of us. Thank you.
I'll share that I've had a really good conversations with Patrick Duhaney. And, you know, the same exercise that we're going through with my team, he's going through with his team. In fact, a 1 cent or 2 cents or 3 cents tax cut for his team is more than it is for our team. So they're having the same conversations. And like we are finding some efficiencies with some resources we can peel off without impacting the services we provide. They're finding similar. And we also talked about the opportunity for us to go in lockstep from a raise percentage, because we did not want to pilfer from each other. I've also talked to regional superintendents from Region 2, and the thinking is 3% for the other divisions. Now, we know we're all competing with each other. So last possible moment, you know, a division could go 4 or 5% if we went 3%. But the value add that we provide in Virginia Beach City Public Schools, I'm not worried about losing teachers to a division that might give a 1% more raise, because we have them coming back to us after going to somewhere else. So, but I understand, I'm not asking you guys for decisions. It would be unfair for me to ask you for any decisions because you don't have all the information yet. But what you have done is you've said, okay, we want to see scenarios so we can look at the whole picture before we decide. And I've got all the information that I need. Thank you.
Ms. Franklin?
Well, you addressed some of what I was going to say, and that is, you know, I don't want to take a compensation look off the table, but at the same time, we don't really have enough information. It is just human nature. If we say 3 to 5%, that's what people are going to hear, you know, and that's what the expectation is going to be. And so I would caution us to make sure that we have that information first, and then we can have a fact-based decision that and discussion that's being made. So I would just caution us to not throw numbers out there right now. It seems like as soon as, you know, something is said, then it's assumed. And so so I just would like to, what is the time frame, just based with your discussions on the city, with the city, that we would be?
So as Ms. Pate shared, we'll be presenting our CI on February 6th.
Sure.
Based upon the information that we have right now. But we do expect some changes at the state level after the legislature reconvenes and do their normal process they do every year. And we, once the real estate assessor sends the real estate assessments out in late February, that'll give the city an idea of, hypothetically, if the real estate assessments went up 3%, then what would a cost neutral cut be? So they won't know that. So our CION is going to be on February 6th, our best thinking based upon the money in hand. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in getting much more information before we go down that road. Thank you.
Ms. Martin?
So a couple of things, if we could also take a look and see where we still have compression issues to address before we look at raises. I think we still had some compression issues to address in
Yeah, Siegel
support staff?
has been working closely with
Okay.
Ms. Woodhouse and her team,
Excellent.
and she has that information.
Okay. And then on the $20 million for a 3% raise, does that include the state-funded portion for the SOQ piece?
So the 20 million is what it cost us based on our employee population to give them the raise and full benefits. So it includes all the benefits. So it's just our estimate of what it would cost us. So if then the state comes in and says, we're going to give you so much money towards SOQ position, that will go towards that 20 million.
Okay, so that would reduce the 20 million, because I do see we got the 1% bonus in the governor's budget, and then a 2% raise in 25, and then another 1%. bonus, I think if I'm reading that correctly. So it'd be good to see what those numbers are in terms of peeling off those SOQ costs from that 20 million figure. That might make it a little easier to understand and kind of see what the outlay for our taxpayers would be here in the city as compared to the overall state population. So
Right now, the compensation for 25 is just the bonus.
just the 1%.
Yeah, the
okay.
2%'s coming in 2026, the way it
Gotcha.
stands right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so, thank you. Let's move to our next, item, which is the PPEA, the school and school design update. Welcome, Mr. Jack Freeman.
Good afternoon, Chair Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, members of the board, and Dr. Robertson. We have two guests presenting today. Amy Yurko is our educational facility planning expert for these projects, and her firm Brain Spaces is working with us to develop the educational specifications and to help right-size the buildings. Amy brings over 30 years of experience planning and designing schools which collectively serve over 2 million students worldwide. As both an educator and architect, she is uniquely adept at translating educational activities into space needs. She teaches EdSpec writing as part of the only international accreditation program for professional school planners. Amy has worked with us before developing the EdSpecs for Prince Anne Middle School, and she's here today to explain our EdSpec process and answer any related questions with you. Mike Ross will follow Amy. Mike is a principal architect and educational facility planner at HBA, a Virginia Beach architecture firm. He is the PPA team's principal architect for the Prince Anne High School replacement, Betty F. Bayside 6 replacements. Mike has been planning and designing schools for over 35 years, and notable local projects include Tallwood High School, Pembroke Meadows Elementary School, Virginia Beach Middle School, the 2007 Virginia Beach City Public Schools Long Range Facility Master Plan, and the 2017 update, the 2009 Division-wide High School EdSpec process, Kellam High School replacement, and John B. Dye Elementary School modernization. Mike is also past president of the Virginia Beach Educational Foundation and currently serves on the board as grants chair. Before they share their information, know this is a continuation of the brief that you received in November when Ms. Ingram shared with you the 30% designs for Prince Anne High School, Williams and Bayside 6, and Bayside High School. During that November meeting, we asked board members to forward their questions about designs to the chair and vice chair by December 1st, so we could design a brief that effectively answered those questions. And we received no questions. It was wonderful news. But we do know that there's questions about the size of the building, so that's why we're going to focus on the educational specifications and the size of the buildings. And every question about the size of buildings ultimately comes down to the EdSpecs. So this brief will be focused there. Amy will cover that, and we've added information related to comparables, which were other questions that came up, and Mike will cover those. Before we dive into that, during another brief in November, I shared some inflation and CIP funding related information that requires some follow-up. But let's start with a brief exercise. Here's your choice. You are offered $1 million or 1 cent doubled daily for 30 days, and your goal is to have the most money at the end of those 30 days. Which would you choose? I'll give you about 10 seconds to think through it. And so what I mean by that is you get 1 cent on day one. So day 2, you get 2 cents. Day 3, you get 4 cents. I'm sorry, day 3, you get, 4 cents, and then day 4, you get 8 cents. All right. I was going to give you some time, so let's do that. So show of hands, who's taking the $1 million? Who's taking the $1 million? Who's taking the 1 cent doubled every day? How much money will you have at the end of 30 days? So here's a slide that gets you to day 27. Day 27, you get $671,000, and then that's going to double from there. So for those that chose $1 million, not feeling so good at this point. So the answer is $5.3 million double daily, if you took the 1 cent double daily. So you can see how sharply the values rise at the end of that. And if you're like most groups, if you're seeing for the first time, some of you are thinking, it sounds like some of you have heard this before. So you kind of understood that it's a lot of money that gets associated with it. There's a lot that they can't believe it. It's such a massive number. And that's why we've included the chart over on the side to be able to show how that doubling actually works. So this is an example of the power of compounding interest and how significantly values grow the longer the time horizon. And you can look at those last 4 days, how much it grows. So that's how it works for an investor. The math is also similar when it comes to inflation. So this is the slide we shared with you in November with the past 3 years of inflation based on data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. In yellow are projected the inflation rates for new construction of schools over the 6-year CIP. Now this is the approved appropriations over the 6-year CIP. It's essentially level. I shared at that meeting that if you started from the current year, the loss in buying power due to inflation over the course of the 6-year CIP was roughly $70 million. But that doesn't tell the whole story because we've been losing buying power since 2009. We use 2009 as a reference point because leading up to 2008 and 2009, appropriations had been trending up. And in 2008, as Ms. Anderson shared at that meeting, lottery funds, which had previously been designated for school construction, were incorporated into the general fund with no apparent adjustments made by the state to account for that loss of funding to the CIP. Thank you. So this is a new slide. So let's start from 2009 to 2010. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to kind of walk you through it. The dark blue bars represent the actual CIP appropriation for each year. So $62.7 million in 2009-10. That dropped to $35 million in 10-11, and you can see the blue bars as they progress to the right. The light blue bars represent the funding needed when accounting for that year's actual inflation to maintain buying power. As you follow the light blue bars from left to right, you can see the transition from light blue bars to yellow bars. In yellow, we use the projected inflation numbers. So actual for the light blue, projected for the yellow bars that you saw earlier in 2 slides ago. All right, so now if you go back to the left again, the gray bars that drop down represent the yearly deficit, and in red, it shows the actual value of that year's deficit. You can see that much like during our compounding exercise at the beginning of the brief, compounding has a greater effect over time in the later years. And by 28-29, school year 28-29, there is a $114 million projection of loss in buying power in that year alone. It's $114 million in 1 year. If you add that up over all the years, the estimated cumulative loss of buying power is about $900 million over that time frame. I told you at the last brief that the CIP ship is sinking, and this is the primary reason. We have been underfunding, the CIP has been underfunded for over a decade, and we're feeling it in many ways, and there's currently no relief on the horizon. So how do we maximize what we have? One way is that we've been evaluating a PPEA for over 2 years now. At one point, the estimated offset of funding was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The PPA has met all of the wickets so far, and we're in the final stages of evaluating the PPA. And we'll have more on the funding piece at the next brief, but that was to close out the discussions that we had at the last brief. All right, so for this meeting, we're focused on the educational specifications and right sizing inherent with the 3 designs. In addition to the 3 designs, improvements and adjustments will need to be made to Holland Road Annex so it can be suitable swing space for construction of Princess Anne High School and Bayside High School. The design process involved experts in their fields, informing experts in building design and construction. Experts informing experts. The process was inclusive and participatory, getting input from various users of the building and interested parties. And the process addressed shifts in education. During the process, we followed Virginia Beach City Public Schools' values and priorities, including school board policies, our core values, and the strategic plan. We valued input and collaboration. The school board has modeled this behavior time and again in getting input from the community in order to make well-informed decisions. And we value equity. We also intend to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars by right-sizing our designs to ensure that they are no bigger than what we need. We heard loud and clear from the board, city council, and the community the desire for spaces that support increased opportunity and focus on career and technical education pathways. We also have a growing population of students with disabilities, and Princess Anne High School is home to a central program supporting our students with profound disabilities. We value life cycle costs over upfront costs, which is better stewardship of taxpayers' dollars. Designing in energy efficiency is an example. We considered ease of maintenance and resiliency. We also considered the fact that the weather in Virginia Beach comes with risks that are less concerning to those further inland, and stormwater mitigation is addressed at every new school we build. And we're focused on designing buildings that have features that improve safety and security. Finally, in the past, we sized high schools allowing for small growth in enrollment. These high schools considered stable enrollment. There's one small exception. We have allowed for growth in the wing that supports students with disabilities at Princess Anne High Schools. This population is increasing, I shared earlier, and given that this is the only location of its type in Virginia Beach, we accounted for growth there. Here's a brief history of how we've designed schools in Virginia Beach. Prior to 2005, there was little to no collaboration. Educators received the building that was provided. It's like designing an airplane and never talking to a pilot. So when designing Virginia Beach Middle School, a space allocation document was developed, which was an excellent step towards collaboration and input. When the long-range facility master plan was developed in 2007, it was clear that several high schools were in the priority list, and 21st century learning concepts indicated the need for thoughtful school designs. In response, division-wide educational specifications were developed in a joint recommendation supported by DeYoung Richter and HPA. These ed specs were the basis for Kellam High School. Fast forward to 2023, last year when sharing information during the CIP process, the school board directed updating the educational specifications to support designing the schools included in the PPA. So that's what was done. The process included 29 public input meetings, 4 student focus groups meetings, over 80 interviews with various stakeholders, and online surveys. The process also included a design efficiencies meeting on August 1st, 2023 to eliminate everything other than what was necessary. The group was limited to senior staff, Virginia Beach City Public School program experts, principals, and the design experts. We've all likely heard the false narrative that everybody just asked for the moon and it was given to them. That's wrong. Staff paid great attention to only include what the experts believed what was necessary. There are several priorities that have implications on the size of buildings in these designs. For example, during the EdSpec process, it was determined that the most effective way to include CTE spaces in high schools, that it was most effective to include them in high schools rather than building an entirely new dedicated CTE building, which had been suggested by some. I'll let you read the rest of the 4. In short, these priorities have space implications that are unique to Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And we're going to walk through those, starting with Miss Amy Yurko. I'd like to invite her to the podium to walk you through the ed specs.
Thanks, Jack. And thank you for allowing me to be with you today, and Happy New Year. So our first, I don't know who's controlling the slides. Do I? Oh, excellent. All right. Excellent. Okay. So I'm an ed spec writer, which means I translate what education needs to happen into spaces that need to support that. It sounds pretty simple, but we have a lot, there's a lot to it. If not, there'd be an app for that, right? Our process is illustrated in several slides here, but the first thing is to understand what's important and to dive deeply into what is important. That's the why. That's the why we're doing what we're doing. And we need to understand that before we can get to the what we need to design. So the middle section is ed specs. So it's linking the why to the what, the why to the design. That includes understanding the hows and the whats and the whos of all the pieces that come together. And I know the text is small here, but it included a whole lot of fact finding that you saw listed in Jack's presentation as well. So really, we can't begin designing unless we know the things above that line, and that's what we did in a very engaging process. One of the first things to do is understand what are the basic parameters of the projects, and that includes everything from enrollments to which programs are going to be supported. So I won't go through the details here, but I will tell you that during the process, we started with some different numbers here, even from the enrollment standpoint, from looking at demographics and finding, let's really look at what our projections are, as opposed to going with, the numbers that we originally thought over a couple of years ago. So we also looked at what's unique about each of the schools, because that will tell us how to tailor some of those space needs to meet the needs that are unique, whether that's IB curriculum or academy programs and so forth. So as you can see here, these are the list of sort of the basic parameters, the goal guideposts, if you will, for defining the ed specs. Now we need to jump in. So what we did now then is look at all the meetings that were already listed, but we looked for what is important. And what we got was a series of themes that were emerging that seemed to be important to nearly everyone we spoke with, nearly every student we met with, nearly every teacher. And so those became our sort of success metrics for what we know these buildings need to be able to accommodate. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but security, not just being safe, but feeling safe. Flexibility and adaptability to be able to plan for an unknowable future. What are the workforce needs in the future? We need to be able to accommodate those shifts. Student-focused learning, inspiration, motivation, teacher retention, which I know was just discussed, professional futures, what students were going to be doing next in their lives, flow, just traffic flow, easy ways to get around the building. And I love the last one here, which sort of summarizes a lot of different comments, but don't forget the basics, daylighting, restrooms, things like that. So we know we need to get those right as well. So these were our sort of listening session results, and we used these to work through the space planning for the buildings. Again, the history of designing schools in general, sort of around the world actually, not just in Virginia Beach, was really top-down, less discussing needs with teachers and with parents and students. Now it's more collaborative. We were sort of designing for the 3 R's, which is arguably not even ours. But now we're adding the 5 C's or the 9 C's, whichever structure that you've heard about, but essentially it means creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and character. So there's a lot more to it. Of course, we're focused on the 3 R's, but we're adding a lot more to that. So again, the way that we used to design is different, and the way that buildings need to look to accommodate that is different as well. What should we care about now? The old schooling was about appearances, was about creating a loan, being quiet, presenting, being introverted. You've seen all these. This is a school I went to. where collaboration, they called it cheating back then, right? So those schools looked different than the schools that we are looking to design now. It's not the sit and get or the egg crate sort of classrooms. It's more individualized. Again, the key takeaway here is that educating students today looks different. We're very fortunate to live in a time when there's a lot of research about that, about how the brain works and how people learn. And so it's time to begin to recognize that in our building plans. Some of what are the space implications of some of those things? So this is just a quick series of vignettes that illustrate that sure, there's group learning, sure, there's still some of those things that we do well and we still need. However, more collaborative spaces, more different sizes of spaces, individual, small group spaces, spaces to gather. And so that's what we started with as we're going through the process. So, and this will map out, and it's animated to map out how we got where we are. So we started out with that wish list, and again, you've heard about all of the requests, all the asks that we got. Now, not everything made it into that original wish list. Maybe there's an example of. Swimming pool. No, we didn't. We sort of made that first cut. But then after those big things were taken out, we have a wish list, and that's a good place to start. Let's look at what everybody wants to be able to do and what they need, the spaces they need to do it. The next step we did was the experts advising experts, is we talked to a lot of people. We also brought in research from other districts, from other schools, from around the country, and we looked at exploring some spaces. Could we use these multiple ways? Could we eliminate redundancies? If 5 people asked for conference rooms, could we say, well, maybe we could do that in 2? So we looked for ways to right size also about right sizing the spaces. How many people are going to be in there? What's the size of equipment? So we looked at each one of the spaces that way. Planning for the future. Durability was huge. Schools are used all hours of the day. There's not the time anymore that you can clear out the school and clean it and things like that. So those were also in the mix. Flexibility I mentioned before. So all of that first pass, or you could say second pass of right sizing, took us 20 to 30% down from our wish list. That's right sizing enrollments, that's right sizing spaces, that's finding redundancies and looking at this in a lot of different ways. And the different schools had different percentages, so this is just an average, but at the very least it was 20%. The very most was 30-some. So then we looked at that, and we went one more time back to that August 1st meeting where we said, are we sure? Are we sure? And we looked at those spaces again, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. Just to make sure that we talked through each one of those spaces and got it right. And so after doing that, we feel quite confident that the design represents what is needed, but no more. What is needed for those programs that you want to offer your students, and without having a lot of extra and fluff. So that's where we are. That's where the ed specs define what those space needs are. So I'll show you an example of one process, and this is using the gym. This is what we call bubble diagrams in our planning language, and this shows a gym, a field house gym that has 3 gym floors, 3 basketball courts in it. That was our initial input. We see a wrestling room, we see a fitness room. There's a whole lot of other spaces here, but just for making this point, I've limited it to this 3 in this particular slide. So that was our first step. Okay, we quantified that. Then the next thing said, could we do those three floors, the 3 gym floors in with some overlap? So perhaps we have 2 cross courts and a main gym, and then you have a little bit more edge space for bleacher seating that can be retractable and so forth. So we can still get our bleacher seating. And we looked at fitness, and we looked at the wrestling room as fitness happens during the day, wrestling happens after school. Could those 2 share? Because it's non-simultaneous use. So we thought, okay, great, we'll save some square footage there. So that's what we proposed. And then we went to the next step, and we said, well, maybe that wrestling room is a little bit too large. Do we really need that much spectator seating in the wrestling room? So we took that down another 2 or 3%, in there, because we took out a couple of rows of spectator seating in the wrestling/fitness room. And then the designers began to design. So in the last phase of it, they said, hey, guess what? We have some seating that if on a mezzanine, that if we could use retractable bleachers there, we can actually put fitness on that floor. And we got the fitness back, so now it doesn't have to share the wrestling, which is good because there's mats and things that are difficult to move and things like that. So it was kind of a win-win. We added that function back without adding the square footage back, because the square footage was already counted as bleacher space for the spectator seating in the main gym. Does that make sense? So that, sort of, we did that with a lot of different spaces. So what you see here is sort of the bubble diagrams of the whole program. And we had a very intricate and involved discussion about all of these spaces to make sure that they were right-sized. We also did this in, of course, spreadsheet format, so we can get to that bottom line, and that's where you see a lot of these numbers that are published and discussed. So of course, every single space is listed in a spreadsheet and gets us to that bottom line. We did that, of course, also for Betty F. Williams and Bayside 6, same exact process, and we're happening simultaneously. As a matter of fact, some of the discussions on one school helped us understand things at another school, so we were more efficient that way as well. And then, of course, they have a spreadsheet as well. And I'll just point out here, I know these numbers are really small, but in the blue section in the middle between Williams and Bayside 6, it shows all the spaces that are shared between those two campuses. And so it's around 25,000 square feet that we don't have to build because we are co-locating these schools. And so when we looked at that 20 to 30%, this school had the more 30% side because of the additional sharing that was possible by combining these campuses. So then we, as we go through the design and the design of other spaces, we want to reiterate that there are shifts in 21st century education that do cause a ripple effect to school planning. So for the fact that learning is more active, learning is more applied, it's less conceptual, you get your hands dirty a little bit, And what that means for the ed specs is that kids are up moving more. You need more elbow room. You need more space in those rooms. It means that there's more specialty labs so that you can do projects. And so there's more support spaces needed for those specialty labs so you can store the equipment that you need and use the space flexibly. Learning is more individualized. Students have needs that are unique, and so therefore more variety of spaces, not all the same. The students don't learn all the same way. It's not one size fits all anymore. There's more services, as you've heard on several fronts. There's more services for students, and that takes up space. Learning is future focused as well. So the CTE courses are critical, not just for careers, but as we were interviewing students, they said, I'm going to college, but I need to work my way through college, so I need to be employable. And there's a lot of nuance there, but it's future ready, future focused. That all learners are supported, so it's not just a select few, but it's also considering accessibility and students with other needs, and obviously security is important, so that has impacts on how we design space and how you flow through space and what are those controls and access controls. And student participation has increased. That's kudos to you guys. More students are eating lunch. More students are hanging out on campus longer. So students are more involved. They don't just leave at 2:30 anymore. So all of these have space implications that you will see, and when you look through the ed specs and you look through those bottom lines. And I think all of it's very encouraging because it's supporting learners in so many different ways. What I'd like to do now is invite Mike up to show you how that works in our actual projects. He's already here.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, school board members, and Dr. Robertson. There we go. So now that as Amy has explained why today's schools need to be a lot bigger than they were 60 years ago, I want to illustrate this with tangible examples of spaces in our proposed high school ed spec that are either larger than those in the current Bayside High School or do not exist in the current Bayside High School. The current Bayside High School is a little bit over 200,000 gross square feet. The Ed spec prototype high school is proposed to be about 336,000 square feet and some change. So these are some of the spaces in the ed spec that are either larger or additional to what's in Bayside. Classrooms, for example, are larger. The existing classrooms in Bayside are around 675 square feet. The new classrooms are proposed to be about 800 square feet. You heard Amy talk about active learning, or learning that's more engaged. Students need more room to move around. Science labs, for example, 12 square feet in the existing school, 1,200 square feet in the new school, which is actually the state minimum recommended size for those. We have flexible learning spaces in the SBEC, which are not in the current high school. We have more support space for staff. We want to treat our teachers as professionals. They need planning space, and we have more space for education, special education. Under instructional activities, we have more and larger spaces for music and performing arts, more space for storage, more space for teaching. Same goes for visual arts. We have more spaces for phys ed and athletics, both in terms of number of spaces and size of spaces. The Health Sciences Academy is currently operating in labs that are once again about 900 square feet. We're proposing those to be that same 1,200 square feet as the science labs. Career and tech ed spaces, many more program elements in the ed spec than are currently in the current high school, because we've heard loud and clear how important that is to the community and to develop workspace skills. Support spaces, dining commons area is larger, the media center is larger. SCOLA doesn't exist in the current high school, so that's a new space. Administration areas, guidance areas are larger, the clinic is larger. Hallways are a little bit larger. We've got a much larger field house proposed. And one of the other major thing is, and Jack mentioned life cycle cost of buildings and also ease of maintenance. We're very focused on making sure that our mechanical systems have a long life and are easy to operate and economical to operate. So to that effect, we've provided indoor mechanical spaces which facilitate that goal. So there have been some questions raised regarding how our proposed high school ed spec update compares to other recent schools in Virginia, and I'm going to attempt to answer these questions in the next series of slides. This graphic is a listing of the most recent 8 high schools either under construction or completed over the last 5 or 6 years. And there's the name of the high school, county, and then the bid years, and then the 3 primary metrics by which we compare schools to each other: student capacity, building area, and the primary metric, which is square foot per pupil. Below the 8 schools in black is the Virginia Beach prototype design with its capacity, building area, and square foot per pupil. And then below that is the Virginia statewide average for the last 12 or so years at 160 square foot per pupil. So as I mentioned, square foot per pupil is really kind of the first gauge we look at when we start comparing schools across the state. And you can see that at 170, we're not the largest, we're not the smallest, we're kind of in the middle. 129 is the smallest, and 204 is the largest. And we're approximately about 6% higher than the statewide average of the last 12 years. So that's 6%. That represents about 19,000 square feet. Now, we were able to obtain drawings for 2 of these schools. So we were able to do a much deeper dive, and that would be the J.R. Tucker High School in Henrico County and the Stafford County High School number 7 in Stafford. So this graphic here is just going to show a very high-level analysis of space types in each of these 3 schools. And I think the initial reaction from looking at this graphic is the schools appear to be very similar at this level of detail. The exception being the PPA high school on the left has a much larger complement of career and tech education spaces. The J.R. Tucker High School has much more space dedicated to testing and support of those activities. And Stafford County High School is a music and performing arts academy, so it has more spaces dedicated to those types of activities. But these types of comparisons at this level kind of give you the first clue as to what might be key differences in educational, operational needs and approaches between different counties and different schools. So if we look at this data in a slightly different way, it gives us a little bit more information about key differences in comparing spaces to each other. Now, the way this chart works is the space types are in the left-hand column, and then that column to the next to that with the blue header is the net square footages for the PPA prototype high school. Next to that in the green color is the spaces allocated for J.R. Tucker High School. And then the next column of that, also green at the header, that column shows the percentage differential between space we have allocated for the prototype high school and J.R. Tucker. The next row to the right in the light blue is the Stafford County High School net square footage analysis, and then once again to the right of that, those are the delta percentages between the prototype high school and Stafford High School. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see that there's a bright yellow box. Every cell that's bright yellow means it's 10% lower in percentage than the prototype high school. And then the orange color means that it's 10% higher. So you can see that at this level, even though these high schools appear to be very similar at the capacity and square footage level, when you start doing a deeper dive into them, they're very different. The other thing I want to point out in particular, it's an interesting anomaly. As you look at the data in the red box that I've just highlighted, number of teaching stations, it's pretty interesting that we have 89 teaching stations proposed for the prototype, whereas J.R. Tucker only has 84 teaching stations, but they're proposing 90 more students in their capacity. So what that tells me is that they're either calculating capacity differently or they're putting a lot more kids in their classrooms. If we did the math on that difference between the 89 and the 84, and they were counting capacity similar to how we counted capacity here, and also in Stafford County, that capacity or square foot per pupil number would probably be in about the mid 150s. So there's something going on there with respect to a difference in their philosophy about how many kids are in these classrooms. And that's part of what's making that look like an attractive school. So getting into some of these differentials, you can see the quite a few categories in the J.R. Tucker High School are more than 10% lower in size than the spaces that we have in our prototype high school. Learning communities at 83%, teacher planning areas at 70%, 77%, special education at 60%, so forth and so on. And I noted that the testing areas were higher, so that's the reason for the 154% being higher. Similar with Stafford, you can see that they're actually much closer to us in terms of their learning communities. They also, I mentioned they are a performing arts academy, so they have much more space dedicated to that. But the thing that really jumps out at us on this particular analysis is space allocated to technical and career education. Whereas you can see that where we have 28,000 square feet and some change allocated for that, J.R. Tucker only had about 8,700 square feet allocated, which is about 30% of what we're proposing. And Stafford had even less, about 6,700 square feet or 21%. So what's happening there is that they have a more center-based approach to current education. They have multiple centers throughout the counties, and they're doing more CTE off-site and not focusing on CTE programs in their comprehensive high schools. So that's the reason for that huge differential there in that particular program. So the primary takeaway here is that even though high schools might appear similar in size capacity, they can still be very different what's happening on the inside when you start comparing spaces to spaces. And it really gets back to what are the priorities, what are the educational program needs for those particular communities. Now, this is a little bit different way of looking at the same data. The length of each colored bar represents the total space allocated for each of the types of space as compared to other spaces at school. So you can kind of get a sense, start getting a sense for overall impact of different percentages of space as they compare to each other. And I'm going to focus on 4 of these in particular that had the largest differentials: learning communities, career and tech ed, PE and athletics, and building services. So learning communities in particular, we have more space allocated those primarily because we have those flexible spaces, those student collaboration spaces. Our classrooms are slightly larger. Career and tech ed spaces, I've mentioned that already. There's a very different way they go about doing CTE in Henrico and Stafford, and that has a dramatic impact on the overall square footage of facilities. Phys ed and athletics, we have more spaces, larger spaces, more dedicated spaces to PE and athletics, and that represents itself in these bar charts. And then once again, building services, those interior mechanical spaces which go towards economical HVAC systems and long-term variability, and that's why those are larger. So we keep talking about career tech ed and how that has an impact on the size of the school. And this graphic is meant to give you a kind of an understanding of what that really means. Core classroom is going to have about 25 students in it. It's about 800 square feet. That's the upper square. A career and tech ed lab might be anywhere from 1,800 to 2,400 square feet. So almost 2.5 to 3 times the size, and it's got 20 students in it. So if you have 4 or 5 of these larger labs, it has a dramatic impact on your overall square footage of your building, and also a dramatic impact on your square foot per pupil student ratios. So we've looked at that in bars and numbers and everything else, and just at a high level summary, our high schools are similar to the other schools that we looked at in Henrico and Stafford in the general classroom sizes, science classroom sizes, and individual arts. Where our prototype has more space is in those program areas that we've understood from you are your priorities: technical education, career pathways, flexible extended learning areas for collaborative hands-on learning, special education, physical and wellness education, and the building services maintenance. And then areas where we have less space are administration, testing, and in the case of Stafford, the music performing arts. So once again, our EdSpecs is a reflection of the priorities of Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And key takeaway here is, once again, it's very difficult to make apples to apples comparisons with the data that you see on the Virginia Department of Education website. What you have to do is you really have to do a deeper dive into the data and really look at where the differences are in the educational programs and apply those specifics to the analysis. So, and finally, if you're still wondering how a high school like the one being constructed in Stafford can be at 139 square foot per pupil versus our 170 square foot per pupil, these are the program spaces that we have included in our EdSpec that are not in Stafford County High School. I'm going to give you a second just to look at those. So student collaboration spaces, flexible spaces, student production spaces for hands-on learning, which includes maker spaces, environmental labs. Once again, those large career and tech ed laboratory spaces. The support spaces like the Scola, staff dining areas, club areas. More team spaces like a dedicated wrestling room, and once again, those indoor mechanical spaces. So those are big numbers when you start adding those up. And overall, if you add all that up, that's about 46,750 square feet of space that we have in our prototype that's not in the Stafford High School, and that represents about 14% of our program area. And if you run the math on that, that works out to be about 26 square feet per pupil. So, once again, schools that look similar on the surface, you need to do a deeper dive. And I've tried to give you some background information here of what's happening across the state to help you have a better understanding about where our inspect is different from some of the other schools you might be seeing. I'm going to turn it back over to Jack. Thank you.
All right, so to summarize, we talked about roughly a $900 million loss in buying power since 2009-10. The PPA has an opportunity to do more with less money within the confines of Virginia Beach City Public Schools' values and priorities, which have guided our efforts for these school designs. Staff has been responsive to the request of come back with updated educational specifications. With that, happy to answer all the questions you may have, and I'll kind of coordinate. We'll figure out who the right expert is to answer each one.
Okay, so we're going to start with Ms. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I have a hard time with my old eyes kind of seeing some of this, some of the minutia on these slides. I love the fact that we're incorporating flex spaces. We've heard from quite a few therapists and different workers that they don't have a space right now that they can use. Where are we incorporating those flex spaces again? Just so we can, or that I can just kind of take a look and see where they're going to be.
Just want to point out, I got the first question.
Congratulations.
So yeah, there are several places where smaller groups, smaller spaces come into play. We have a variety of types. One is in resource spaces that are about half classroom size. We've included those as potentially openable to each other. So if you needed a bigger space, you can open the wall and you can get another teaching space. But they're about half size, so you'd expect 8 to 10, 12 students in there, 15 maybe. We also have small group spaces. We sometimes call those think tanks, but they're almost office size, where students can be pulled out of the room, work with a specialist, and then go back. And this is those are sprinkled throughout the plans. You'll see that, and those are again smaller groups, 3 to 5 at the most, probably 2 or 3, could be one-on-one, and we don't have those specifically defined as what they should be so that they could be anything. We do expect that those will have windows in them so they don't become storage.
Right, right.
But other than that, we want to put those specialists near the students so that students don't have to go the walk of shame to get their services. They can do it right there.
And how do we determine how much space was needed for that, for the flex spaces?
Sure. So it was a part of the process, and we looked at and we discussed with the specialists what kind of spaces they
Okay, so
need.
it was within discussions?
Certainly.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm. And the way that you size space is essentially 4 things. 3 of them we pay more attention to. One is how many people will be in there. So if there's 2 people to 5, we kind of get the sense. What are they doing? Are they sitting still? Are they doing jumping jacks? There's different space needs for those. And what kind of equipment do you have? So if it's just a chair, or do you need a table too, or are there also, table saws, all those have different sizes. And then the 4th one, which is usually check and balances, are any code requirements and life safety things that you need to accommodate as well. So that's what we listen for when we're having these listening sessions. What are you doing and how many people and is that going to be the most convenient to be efficient and effective? So that's the conversation.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Melnick.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one is, we've talked a lot about the cost of doing business, the cost of supplies. Let's call it the cost of building a building. So Can you give me some concrete examples maybe of how things have increased? So from materials to perhaps even equipment rental. And then this is not my second question, but part of that one is, are we really talking about a guaranteed maximum price?
Here's my request. This is design related. I recommend the next brief is going to be focused on funding and the financing.
Okay, so then let
And
me go to my
those two
design.
items
Uh-huh.
are perfect for our next discussion,
Okay.
if you're okay with waiting.
Then let me go to the design question,
Yeah.
because I thought I heard at some point that the building would be constructed in a way that if at some point down the road we had to combine, we closed some schools and now the student population has increased in in said high school, that the construction might be done in a way that we're going to be able to easily add walls to create more classroom spaces. Is that true?
Sure. So there's two ways we do that. First of all, we look at the plan, the site plan, and the overall building program as a master plan. So within each site plan, there are spaces that we know we can expand the building very easily and economically without adding a whole lot of other infrastructure. The second thing is that we've adopted a kind of an office building technology for classroom spaces in most of the primary learning spaces. And what I mean by that is you've got a steel frame and you've got an infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, most of the partitions are non-structural. So as you move forward, as educational programs change, as your needs change, it's easy to go in and change roof configurations, make them larger, make them smaller, blow out walls, do those kind of things without impacting the structure. So it's an economical future that's built into the planning.
Okay. And from a design perspective, never mind.
Ms. Manning?
Thank you. So, well, first of all, I was just really impressed with the community involvement and how you included so many aspects, special education, food services, our SROs, and I want to recognize Officer Perry, who's here, who participated in our discussions at Bayside. He was very, very valuable because obviously it kept coming back to security, and that was so important. So kudos on that to the team. I have two other things, and I think you're going to tell me, we'll talk about this next time, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
How do you propose we pay for this?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That'll be for the next meeting. That's what the next meeting is designed for.
I'm going to ask it every time because I've been asking about costs from the very beginning and I haven't gotten any answers. So.
Understood.
And then another one is a comment. I brought this concern to Dr. Robertson earlier today because I've received some complaints from some community members who were planning to be here to speak tonight, but they can't be here. So I'm going to speak for them. Our community members received some phone calls, voicemails, and I wrote down what was said. I don't want to misinterpret it. So these community members interpreted that the voicemails was from Virginia Beach Schools because they said on the voicemail they were calling from VB Schools of the Future. Their message provided the information of our board meeting tonight, which I think is great. I think that outreach to the community to let us know what we're talking about is very important. But then on the voicemail, it said they were trying to get as many citizens to attend tonight's meeting so the school board can, quote, see the interest in this project moving forward. And especially with, this is the optics that it's coming from Virginia Beach Schools, which it wasn't. I have some great concerns about that messaging. And, I'd like to have your response on that and what the understanding is about when these messages go out.
So, that conversation that we shared, just for everybody's context, was over the course of, I would say, the last 24 hours, if that's accurate. So, I'm somebody who likes to have all of the details before making a judgment on where fault may lie and things along those lines. It certainly raises questions of, okay, the question is, are things being fairly represented, and is there anything nefarious occurring, and And there was also a suggestion that, okay, were these taxpayer resources that we're paying for these phone calls? All fair questions. I think it would be appropriate at some point to let the contractor have an opportunity to share their perspective. Again, without, you don't make judgment. My perspective is don't make judgment until you have all the information to be able to do that. Tonight's not the time to do that, I don't think, my opinion. I will say that the response that we got from the contractor was the original thought of, hey, this was a Virginia Beach City Public School employee. They had not identified them, but it does sound very similar, and it can be confusing. The contractor stated that those phone calls were the result of, during the course of the 20-plus community meetings that were had, people said, hey, we want to continue to be engaged. We don't know when the meetings are going to occur near the end of the process, so if you could keep us updated, that would be appreciated. So the contractor was saying they were following up on the obligation they had made during the course of the process, that they would keep people updated on the timing of these. And that's about as much information that we have at this point in time. The concern, they expressed valid concern. I think there's more information to be shared to be able to fairly judge what is really occurring. The ultimate message to our community is we're trying to be transparent with the process. It's a very challenging process with a lot of moving parts that are associated with it. I hope the person who received that voicemail and others hearing this, they understand that's not a Virginia Beach City Public School employee that's advocating for it, and it was as stated by the contractor, an attempt to be able to follow up with those constituents that requested to be kept up to date.
And I'm not saying it was nefarious. I didn't use that word. I want to make
You
that
did not,
clear.
and I apologize
Yeah.
I was not
Yeah.
attempting to say that that's what
Okay.
you were saying.
Yeah.
That's just kind of what I was
I just wanted
working
to be
through
clear
mentally.
on that. I
Thank you.
felt it was very misleading and inappropriate. I didn't think it was nefarious.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Callum?
Okay, Mr. Freeman, I am referring to slide number 29 on the handout, and I assume it coincides with the screen. But as I look at slide 29, it's got the three pie charts, so to speak, with the various details associated therewith. Just from my understanding, and part of our process here is to poke, to question, to examine, and to wonder, is it all adding up? So, not that slide, but there is a probably prior to that slide. There you go, pie charts, or the equivalent thereof. I see that the largest area represented in each of these is referred to as gross area. Okay, I assume, without being an engineer or an architect, that just means all of the other stuff that surrounds the actual areas of instruction. But is that an accurate assumption on my part? What does gross area mean, sir?
Gross area, well, let me start with net area first. Net area is the space that's inside the room.
Okay.
Gross area is wall thicknesses, circulation, and certain types of non-occupied rooms, mechanical spaces, those types of things. And there is a grossing factor that we customarily use at this level of planning, where we take the net square footages, what's in the rooms, and multiply it times the grossing factor before we put pen to paper and come up with an estimate of how big the overall building would be. And that estimate is that number you've seen in some of the other charts. It's, I think it was 1.42.
1.42
Yes.
is the
So
multiplier.
that grossing factor is what gives us an estimate of how much the wall thicknesses in all the circulation hallways, support rooms would be that are not contributing to program occupied space.
Okay, now let me switch from that mindset to a mindset that's described maybe as devil's advocate.
Mhm.
Beneath that same pie chart, it says a building like this, or it's implying that, a building like this will produce well-rounded high school students, a well-rounded high school experience, and students that are future ready. And my devil's advocacy says, is a building the source of producing future ready students and members of society? Or is it the curriculum that takes place therein? And should we really never lose sight of that?
Okay. So my response to that is at this level of detail, the spaces that you see projected are a representation of the educational program and where your priorities are. You allocate space towards those things that are important to you.
100%. As a teacher, I taught middle school in Chicago Public Schools.
Speaking to the, thank you.
Thank you. We pay a lot of attention to curriculum when we're designing, when we're translating what needs to happen educationally into space. So that's where we start. However, we as planners prefer to think of it as the building needs to fit like a mitten, not like a glove, to give you wiggle room to change that curriculum over time. Not just workforce needs that change over time, but the way we teach over time will change. And so we tried to, give it a little bit of a loose fit. But yes, we started with the curriculum, and I think I might be the one responsible for the language under the bubbles, so I'll also take ownership of that, is that the approach is that we're looking to maximize opportunities for well-rounded student graduates. That means that there are less standardized spaces and more individual spaces that allow for career-type exploration. So that's the environment that we're creating. Of course, the whole outcome is based on curriculum, strength of teachers, strength of supports, and a lot of other operational and functional elements in any school. The building is not the solution, as much as we like to say it in interviews. We understand that, yes, the building is one aspect, but if the building can nudge a direction, if a daylit room creates better math scores, let's daylight that room. So we know that facilities have impact. Let's do the best we can to make sure those designs give us the value that we're looking for, the most educational impact that we can.
Okay, last question, if I may. If we have arrived at what we believe to be the right size, that implies that we started out with a different size, and through interactions, examinations, and communication, we downsized that to where we arrived at the right size. There's a lot of data here that you've covered, and you may have already answered this question, but I'll ask it nonetheless because I don't know the answer to it, and that is, do you have a sense of we were at X, we took out Y, and right sizing it brings us to Z? Do we have a sense of what the differential is between where we started and where we now have right sized?
We do. We actually have what we're affectionately call a monster spreadsheet that tracks all of that.
Okay.
And it also tracks comparison to the 2009 ed spec, so we can kind of see the history of the district. So that's where the 20 to 30% difference came in when we were talking about the flow. Some of that difference was in programs that were redundant, or space uses that were redundant. Can we do this also in this space and share? Some of it was looking at maybe I use conference room because that's an easy one, but if a lot of departments are asking for conferencing, can we not use, can we share use some of those things? So some of it was smaller spaces, some of it was reducing spaces, some of them was eliminating spaces. Some of them was, space that we'd love to have the ability to do esports, for example. We're not doing that yet, so we're going to include a health classroom where you'll do health classroom, but maybe we could do that in the future. So let's not design it out of that, right? But some of those things sort of made the cut that just weren't part of the curriculum yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that?
Yes,
Okay.
that helps. Thank you.
In the bottom center of the slide is a kind of a graphic representation of the reduction in the overall size of the buildings from the initial ask to the right size. So the dark gray, the larger boundary, is what the ask was.
And then the first gray is the first pass, and the next one, the white, is the actual final.
Yep.
if I may add one more thing. So that was the most important point that they just mentioned to you. So that's the visual of the difference between the dark gray and getting to the white. What's not included in that dark gray, for example, and this goes back to the question of, well, hey, everybody asked for and it was put in, that comment about ask for the moon and it was given to them. I'll give you a couple examples. At Bayside High School, one of the first meetings that we had, there was requests from some groups for a planetarium. There was some groups requested for a waterfall. Things like that never made it into the original consideration to be in there. So it's an example of that gray area wasn't just what everybody asked for originally. There was already some vetting that got us to the larger space, and then they continue to reduce it on the order of 20 to 30% over time. You're welcome.
Okay, I want you guys to look at the time, and we have two more people that want to speak. One question.
Okay,
Ms. Weems.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the community input. It was nice to go to those, and everybody did at the tables that I rotated, talked about CTE constantly. I mean, that was a common thing. I guess this is a quick comment, and then a question. Our struggle is when we're talking to the public and even our city council members, we're looking at a building that was 200,000 square feet, and we're jumping to 336,000 square feet. So we're having to justify a 60% chance increase. Of the 8 schools in Virginia, this one is proposed to be the second largest. The largest has 700 more students. So that's the hurdle that we have to overcome. My question is, you've right-sized, is there a right-sizing 2.0? Because if we can't pass that hurdle, or if when the prices come, they're so astronomical.
So the answer to that question, I think, goes back to our values. The school board has said what they valued. The school board has demonstrated what the school board values. The school board asked us to revisit the educational specifications, assuming it was in the context of the values of Virginia Beach City Public Schools and everything that we outlined on that. So is there an opportunity to do something different? I would say that the school board would need to update the direction that's been provided to the staff, and we begin to have discussions about values. You're welcome.
Okay, next is
Ms. Brown.
Ms. Brown.
Okay. I actually had a few questions, but Ms. Weems was kind of on the same line. So I appreciate all of it, and I'm going to be brief. Everybody's said a lot of things about the process and it was really great. I participated in it, but I do see a lot of CTE and workforce, and I'm a very big advocate of CTE and workforce development in that additional space. But I am curious if those spaces are going to equate to additional programs, and if those programs are going to equate to additional students served for CTE.
So I think what you're asking is, can we confirm that there will be enough students that will have interest to fill those spaces?
I guess so, yes, that's sort of what I'm asking.
I think that's a great question. I don't know that anybody could provide you an answer and say what will occur. Some might talk about if you build it, they will come.
Right.
If you have the opportunity there, we'll do it, or the decisions will be made by the feedback that we received and the fact that we've included them in every high school and that we've included it close to where their people are, and that they don't have to travel somewhere else to go do something that they love and want to be able to do. I think it maximizes the opportunity. The plans that were presented represented the values that were shared of where we want to move for an opportunity. But it's a fair question of, will it be significant enough to attract those students to want to do it? I can tell you, you've seen Sarah Lockett. She's amazing. And the teachers that we have that support this program and others that support it are amazing. So I'd like to think on the bright side that once they get exposure to those adults in that environment, that there would be more that would want to participate. But that would be speculation.
And I was, I guess, more just curious, and this could be a follow-up that perhaps for a different meeting or an email or something. I'm just curious what types of additional programs we might see in that space. I mean, this is a large building and, and if those spaces aren't filled, I don't know if there's perhaps opportunities for students that are in nearby schools. Maybe there's a way to get them there so that we can make sure we're using those spaces. And so that was kind of along the lines of my thinking. Thank you.
But just to point out as well that we heard from Sarah Lockett.
Yes.
That Virginia Beach schools require CTE now, sort of like physical ed is required, science is required. So that's part of where that, space drive comes from. The school has a number of teaching stations for their population of students. So students have to be somewhere. But you can go into a CTE lab and learn science and math. It's harder to learn, pick one, medical science in a regular classroom. So what we're hoping is with the way that the buildings are designed, with visibility and transparency, you can see learning on display, that students might be going to their math or science class, they'll look into, a career tech and go, wow, I'd like to try that. And so by having that, it's sprinkled, not, back when I was in school, you'd go down the back hallway, but it's all visible and open, and, you really can learn math. I mean, what a great way to learn geometry by building a stair. So, more CTE is actually becoming core than it being an extra class, an elective. It's more integrated. So I think that's, part of the answer to your question, in addition to what Jack explained, is first we have requirements in the school division, and we also have a lot more core learned through hands-on projects.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to, thank you very much. It was very inclusive, and we appreciate all of the time that you guys spent. It was very informative.
I want to also thank you to those who participated. It was really lovely to have you there and hear from you as well. Thank you so much.
We appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to recess now, and we'll be back at 6.